So I am taking this video today just because there's part of what I'm living and experiencing that I've never really shared with anyone. And so I want to talk a bit about some deep mental health issues that I've had for many years and talk a bit more about trauma. That's like a big word, and for very long I didn't really feel really legitimate to talk about that. First of all, because I didn't really think that I had experienced proper trauma, like, I've never been to war, I've never been beaten up, I've never been raped. So like, who am I to talk about trauma when none of those horrible things have ever happened to me? And secondly, I just didn't want to feel like I was just complaining for nothing and take away from all the people who've experienced proper overt trauma. And yeah, I didn't think it was worth me sharing anything. But I just recently came to realize that trauma and its consequences come in very different shapes and sizes. And in my case, it's very, very hidden, insidious. So much so that I even feel like no one's going to believe me if I explain what I truly live every day in my head and in my body. And trauma and depression isn't necessarily what it looks like, especially if, like me, you keep hiding your symptoms to the rest of the world and have what we call high functioning depression and anxiety, coupled with a few other things in my case, which are much more disturbing and hard to live with than just depression and anxiety. And those things include something that I found out very recently that I had, and it's called depersonalization syndrome, which I'll briefly explain later. So just to set things up, and I think people who know me would agree that I appear to the rest of the world as fairly confident and successful, but that couldn't be further from the truth of what I really live inside every day. And because of that apparent confidence, energy, and that joyfulness that I always bring with me and share with other people, it's very difficult for me to try to break the mask of that character and let the world see what's really happening inside. And it's hard because I feel like I'm a big liar, that what I am presenting to the world is very different from what I live inside. And I also feel like I've been cheating myself and lying to myself, but I can't seem to find a way to break that cycle. And talking about that feels really deeply wrong. And yeah, who am I to talk about trauma, depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems when all what people can see is that I'm so grounded and balanced and confident, because that's only what I let myself present to the world. How can I complain when my life is so perfect? When I keep getting praised by others because I had the guts 2 years ago, for example, to quit my job, to go traveling, to create a freelance life for myself and become a yoga teacher, when it just all seems so easy, performing well in the corporate world and, getting asked by many agencies and brands to work for them because of my reputation for being an amazing PR consultant, while in parallel, finding time to teach yoga classes and workshops that people seem to really love. And one part of me is definitely all of that and very confident and like to do a lot of new things all the time. But another part that's very hidden is the opposite like one part of me is constantly, and when I say constantly, I mean it. I mean every single second of every day. I'm constantly scared of people, what people might think of me, worried about people's opinion, constantly judgmental about myself and about like every single thing I do or say. I'm constantly super anxious and stressed, like without any reason. It's just kind of my default setting. I'm always that way. And again, every single second, I just put myself down. I doubt myself. So because I have that kind of anxiety, I've had depression since I can remember, since a very, very young age. And sometimes, I spend like 2 or 3 days in a row just not being able to get out of my room, like very depressed just for no apparent reason. When the day before I was just at work, like, really well, or out with friends, and I was like very, there. And then the next day I just cannot, function. Or, if anyone pays me a compliment, I smile, I say thank you. But deep down, what I think is, oh, you know what? They probably just wanted to be nice and they didn't really mean that. Like, I constantly do that with everything. So I've been seeing a new therapist for a bit over a year. And I've been seeing many, many, many therapists for the past, like, I was going to say 20 years, but it's more, because I think I saw my first therapist when I was 5 or 6 years old, and I'm 33, so it's way over 2 decades. Because I've always had kind of mental issues, but things really, really escalated about 9 years ago, leading me to a really horrible situation that I'm in today, and that no one can really tell from the outside. And so in those past 9 years, I've been experiencing very strange but consistent, like, mental, emotional, and physical issues, which I kept reporting to therapists and doctors, but no one really seemed to get it. And my situation just continued to worsen bit by bit, while the facade of what I'm presenting to the world stayed the same, which kind of every day deepens the gap between what I present myself to the world and what I experience inside, which gets worse and worse and worse. And all of that kind of make it harder and harder to talk about my issues, to trust that I would be believed by people, because they can't see any of it. So I'm just so scared that people will just not believe me. And like, to the point where I don't even believe myself. I don't even trust myself about what I'm experiencing. But it's only like in the past week or so that I got a proper diagnostic, at least about the main thing that is making my life hell, like, aside from depression and anxiety, and that is called depersonalization and derealisation syndrome. So, which is coupled with anxiety and depression, but that depersonalization syndrome has been discovered in the past 10 days maybe. And because it was just recently that I was able to articulate my challenges and what I was experiencing exactly to my therapist, and kind of read testimonies on internet, and was like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I have. So only because of that, after 9 years, I was able to get a therapist who told me, yeah, that's a syndrome that we need to address before we can work with any of the depression and anxiety. So kind of just to go back where it all started, because I think it's always interesting to notice when that shift happens. So it was a bit over 9 years ago, because I've been experiencing this depersonalization thing for about 9 years. So a bit over 9 years ago, I went through a very traumatic relationship that lasted about 2 years with a covert narcissist. So narcissistic abuse is very damaging for the victims, but usually it's overt narcissists. Covert narcissists, I really insist, is like a different stream. And like it's just very insidious, very hidden. No one knows. It's very, very sneaky. So I was with that covert narcissist, living like covert narcissistic abuse repeatedly for 2 years. So he like manipulated me really deeply, both mentally, emotionally, gaslighted me constantly. Like he would sub in a very subtle way bring me down, like every day just a little bit more, in a very subtle way, to the point where he made me doubt my own thoughts, my own intentions, made me doubt my emotions, like something was wrong with me, that I couldn't have those emotions. So yeah, very, very damaging, and just kind of end up make you feel like you're literally going crazy, like you're going crazy. Exactly in parallel to that relationship. So during those 2 years I was with that guy, it was also my first 2 years in the corporate world, having finished my studies. So I was in my first job in a big PR agency in Paris, and I had a very tough time at work during that time, with a lot of stress, and I like ended up doing a proper burnout, because like I couldn't go to work for a bit over a month. I like went to see the doctor. I was such in a bad mental and physical shape because of stress that they were like, you cannot go to work for like at least a good month. So yeah, all of that happened around the same time. And then in November of that year, so November 2011, in about a week's time, I just couldn't like do it anymore. Like the relationship, the job, it just, so like in a matter of days, like days apart, I just ended my relationship, quit my job, and started to look for a new house to move in with my best friend, who had just come back from 2 years in the US. So yeah, that situation with the covert narcissistic abuse, work, like, and ending all of it at the same time was very overwhelming, like more than I could bear, to be honest. And right after the breakup and leaving my job, in just a matter of days, I think my body and my mind just went into a complete shutdown mode, where like I could not process what was happening, what had happened for those 2 years. It was just too much at every single level, emotional, mental, psychological. It was too much for my body and for my brain to process. So I remember the first symptoms were both mental and physical, but very subtle externally, like to people around. So it started with me feeling like I wasn't there. I remember, I don't know exactly when it started. I just remember a specific moment where I kind of like started to freak out. I was in Paris. I don't even know if it started when I had ended that relationship already, or if I had already quit that job. It's all very blurry, like in terms of the timings. I don't really know, but I remember having that sense of being like completely lost in space and time, not being able to remember simple things from my everyday life. Like I would meet someone new, they would tell me their name once, twice, 3 times. I would not remember it, like things like that. Like just feeling completely out of my body and out of my mind, feeling like as if I was completely out of myself, as if I was seeing things happening before my eyes, but I wasn't there to experience any of it. Not recognizing myself in the mirror, not really recognizing others, like my friends, my family, just knowing that they're my friends and family, but I don't recognize, like I don't feel like it's them anymore. Having no emotions also at all, except like a constant feeling of panic and deep anxiety for no apparent reason, like all the time. And it was like if I was constantly high, but not the good kind of high. Completely dissociated from myself and from the world around, like if I was in a dream and I couldn't differentiate reality and fiction. I couldn't place myself in time and space. And I also started not being able to feel parts of my body. I remember being in my living room, kind of like I was kind of doing something and brushing my leg with my arm, and I couldn't feel my leg. And at that time, because I had all those other symptoms, I just went to see my GP saying like, I've have those symptoms, I feel like I'm not there, it's hard to describe, and also I feel like I can't feel my body. But he didn't really think any of it. And I remember telling him that I freaked out because I couldn't feel my legs, and I was in my living room and I was like, okay, I took a fork and I started to, like, not in a hard way, but to kind of like plant the fork in my thigh just to see if I could feel the fork going into my muscle, and I couldn't feel anything. And I wasn't like stabbing myself, but like poking kind of myself with the fork, thinking, oh, like if the fork is on that part of my body, this is what I should feel in my body, but I couldn't feel anything. So it was just really strange. So I told that story to my GP, who knew I also had that burnout very recently with work. So he just said, look, it's just stress. You're just tired. Like, don't worry. He didn't really think anything of it and just didn't understand the depth of the problem that I was sharing. So anyway, and around the same time, I started to have a stabbing pain in my stomach from time to time. And again, I went to see GPs. So I went to like 1, 2, 3 GPs because I didn't get understood by anyone. So I went to see new people, hoping that they would understand, like, look, something's wrong. And they all said, oh, like it's stress. I've done a lot of blood tests. They were all okay. So they said, all your blood tests are okay. Nothing's wrong. And because I didn't have any other symptoms, like overtly serious, they said, yeah, it's stress. I kept saying that, like, I felt like something was really wrong. I could feel it. And I asked all of them if we could run some more tests, but they all said no, that I was just like worrying for nothing. So honestly, I didn't feel understood at all. Just because my blood tests were normal, they didn't want to pursue any other avenue. But even though I kept repeating that, like that stomach pain, it doesn't feel right. It just feels like something's, not normal. I could feel that something was just seriously wrong. But the more I insisted, the more I felt like I was going crazy because no one would listen to me or believe me, which made me shut down even more internally. So after a few weeks of that, like nothing changed. I still felt completely disconnected and with that pain in my belly. I had quit that job. I wasn't with that guy. I started a new job, and I was in my new job for about like 10 days, and that pain in my abdomen, right side, right below, like the ribs, started to really intensify. And so I got that feeling of, I can't breathe. I can breathe a little bit, but there's something like in my sternum that's stuck, that's blocking the air, and I can't breathe fully. But again, I didn't have any other symptoms. So like I was working every day, I was waking up, going to work, I was performing really well in my new job, I was going out, I was seeing my friends, like no alarm bells of any kind, until one day where that pain got like really unbearable. And I remember because it was the day of the company's 10th year anniversary, and the CEO was coming from London, was coming to the Paris office to celebrate the 10th year anniversary of the Paris office. It was a big deal. Everyone was like looking forward to that big party in the evening. It was my second week on the job. I thought, oh, what, a great time to join that company. We're gonna have that massive party. And so I remember working the day of the party, and that pain in the right side of my abdomen was so strong. I never, very rarely take sick days or get out of work because of medical reasons unless something's really wrong. And so I've had a few infections in the past, like kidney infections and some pretty bad UTIs in the past, which also, locate in that lower abdomen, lower back area. And so when that pain kind of started to get really unbearable, where I couldn't even type on my keyboard, I was just crunched over my desk. I thought, oh, maybe that's just what it is. It does feel different than a UTI or the kidney infection I had in the past, but maybe that's it. I thought I don't have anything else going on in my body except from those weird feelings, and my doctors just kept telling me that all of those feelings and pain, it's just created by stress. So maybe it's also just stress. I don't know, but it's just really bad right now, so I need to see a doctor. So I told my boss, sorry, I have to go now. I just can't can barely walk, but I'll be back for the party tonight. And she's like, yeah, of course, just, go and do what you have to do. Just make sure you're okay. If you cannot come tonight, it's completely fine. Don't worry about it. So I went to the doctor, the same GP that I had been seeing for the past few months, who told me that nothing was wrong. So I went there, he examines me, touches my abdomen, and it's overly bloated, really. My stomach is yeah, there's a big air balloon inside it. So, he just touches different parts of my stomach, and, don't think it's anything too serious. But the fact that my abdomen is so inflamed and bloated, and it's hard, it's really hard when you touch it. So he said, I don't think it's anything serious, but I do think that you need to rest tonight. Just don't go out. Also, I had fever a little bit, which I never ever do. The only times I've had fever in my life were times where I had massive infections. So until that point, I had fever 3 times in my entire life. So I had an appendix infection and I had to be sent into surgery in emergency. Another time I had fever because I had a kidney infection, the right kidney. And that infection spread to the left kidney, and the doctors were afraid that I might go into a full body infection shock. And the other time that I had fever was when I was very little and I had convulsions. So yeah, I never ever have fever, even if I have the flu or a huge cold or anything, I just don't have fever ever. So I go in there in the doctor's office with a little bit of fever, and I tell the guy, not wanting to tell him that he doesn't know how to do his job. But I see that he's not concerned at all by me having a little bit of fever. And so I just tell him, look, I just want to share. I never ever have fever. Every time I've had fever in my life, something truly wrong happens. So I have a little bit of fever now. So I'm just kind of, a little bit worried. That's it. And it's not normal for me. Again, didn't think anything of it. Didn't even comment, just said yeah, sometimes you get fevers. That just happens. No specific reason. I'm okay. I just know that that's not normal for me and something's wrong. So he just told me to have some rest, that night. And he told me that he would get me an ultrasound the next morning, first thing. It was kind of after hours. So he called a friend of his at Scan's place and asked him if he could cancel his first appointment so I could get in, because it was still kind of an emergency, because he was a little bit worried. So I left. I called my boss to say, really sorry, but the doctor has advised that I should stay home and rest, and I'll be in a bit late tomorrow morning because first thing I have that ultrasound just to check. And during the nights, I had like a crisis, like a pain, horrible pain. And I'm not someone that complains a lot about like physical stuff. I have a pretty good resistance to pain, but that was pretty bad. It was really bad. So I remember not even, like, I didn't even wake up because of the pain, because the pain was always there. So I couldn't really feel completely asleep. But in the middle of the night, that pain just like surged, like in 1 second, to a level where I really couldn't breathe, had like hot sweats, hot fever, which I again never have. I got pretty scared. So something that I had never done before, but I had no other solution, so I called the emergency. Of course, because I'm so polite and I don't want to disturb anyone and just draw attention on me with my problems, which is very typical, and that kind of says a lot about how I deal with life in general when I am in trouble. I just, oh, please, no attention. No, it's okay. It's no, don't worry. How are you? That's the kind of thing I do. So because of that behavior, that typical behavior, I called the emergency, talking like, really low, being like, I'm really sorry to bother you, because I didn't want to wake up my housemates and, draw the attention on me. So I called on the phone, talking really like in a low voice, and I even remember telling the guy on the phone if he could ask the ambulance guys that when they came, if they could call me, just so they don't ring the door's bell or enter inside, just not to wake up my housemates, because I didn't want to bother them for nothing. And I knew that they woke up really early the next day, so I was like, just call me and I'll come down. I'll join you outside. Like, so ridiculous. And I said, look, I have that scan plan tomorrow morning, but yeah, I really cannot wait that long. I'm in too much pain. I can't walk. I can't breathe. It's horrible. Like, you need to come pick me up right now. So they arrived, took me in, brought me into ER at one of the hospitals in Paris, La Pitié-Salpêtrière. And because like outside nothing was overly wrong, I think I stayed in the ER's reception hall where all the patients, wait. So I stayed there for about 24 hours until I got someone to take care of me and run tests. And so they ran a bunch of tests. They couldn't find any cause, but they found where the pain came from, basically. So all my liver function levels and my biliary tract function levels were really in a bad shape. So they identified that I had a deep infection in my liver and biliary tracts. They just couldn't find the cause of it. But yeah, they could tell that I had a huge infection spreading quite rapidly, because they kept running like tests, every few hours to see how the situation evolved. And it wasn't looking good. But they didn't know how to solve it. So they just put me in a room and tried to find specialists in another hospital that could help. So I spent a bit over a day at that first hospital, and it was scary. Like, I could tell the doctors were worried but didn't know what to do, and I couldn't sleep. I was exhausted. I couldn't eat. Also because most of the medication, including pain medication, usually gets processed by the liver. And because they didn't know what was wrong with my liver, and it was very infected, they couldn't give me any medication, because they didn't want my liver to have to process anything, because it was in such bad condition. So I couldn't have any painkillers, because they didn't know how my liver might react. So I stayed there a bit over a day, and the next morning they said I would be transferred to a special unit in another hospital, Necker, that has a dedicated infectious disease department where they only have 10 to 20 beds, I think, and they only treat infections they don't really know the cause of. So it's all unknown disease and stuff. So I got accepted in that special unit thing at that hospital. Still no pain medication, and so I saw 4 or 5 doctors there, like, each specialist in their field. And my case was like a question mark. No one knew. They knew that I had that very acute infection of the liver and the biliary tract, but couldn't trace where it came from. So for the first week, I went through a lot of tests every day just to try to identify if it was something known by the medical world. So, whether it was a virus, a bacteria, an autoimmune disease. So they run all the tests they could to try and identify things that were known. And it was like the TV show, like House, because I had like professors, doctors from many different fields coming into my room every single morning, and like throughout the day, just asking me questions, like, where have you traveled for the past 10 years? Because, for example, I don't know if maybe you went to that part of Asia 10 years ago, there was that virus going on then, and maybe it's just showing up right now for you. Or they also asked me to bring like stuff from my home that I drank and ate regularly just to test it. So for example, I had to bring samples of all the teas that I was drinking so they could run tests and see if maybe, I don't know, there was like a bacteria in there, but they couldn't find anything. So yeah, I would go and test every day, blood tests, scans, etc., until the last test. Because they were like, because it's internal and we don't have any sign of anything more serious than that, we've eliminated all bacteria, viruses, autoimmune disease that we know. There's nothing that we know that can cause an infection, so we have to actually go and analyze the liver itself. So I went through a biopsy of my liver, which was done only with local anesthesia, and was very painful and traumatic experience in itself that, like, I will have to tell that story another time because it would take ages. But so yeah, did that biopsy, came back, it was all normal. So after 2 weeks, they still didn't know what was wrong, was in huge pain, and I started to develop weird side effects. But so because they had eliminated all the viruses, bacteria, autoimmune disease, they thought it was okay to start giving me some morphine. So I had morphine several times a day throughout like my IV in my arm, just to relieve a bit of the pain. But one of the side effects was because I had such a high level of infection in my body, my veins became permeable. And I also had so many blood tests every day done that like my entire arms were just bruised like everywhere. I was just like, blue and purple on all my arms. I still have pictures. It's quite scary. And so the infection and fever meant that I could not, with all of those IVs and, blood tests I had, it meant that like my veins could not sustain like the IV anymore. And so, yeah, I still need to have a few IV for the morphine and, for like, because I couldn't eat. So I had IV with like glucose and water to keep my body hydrated and kind of functioning. But yeah, my veins had become so permeable that the needles wouldn't stay in the vein. And so the liquid from what was in the IV would just spread into my arms. So I would have like pockets of the liquid that was in the IV bags that would leak out of my veins and just make like pockets, bumps onto my arms, because it would, like, the liquid, instead of going into my blood, would spread just into my arms. That was horrible and like quite scary. So then they couldn't, put needles in my arms anymore. So they had to find other parts of my body, like feet, ankles, hands, like right there in between bones, to can stuck the needles so they would stay. So that was really not a nice experience. That wasn't really cool. And the other thing is, and like, again, I don't know scientifically how that works, but I got very itchy everywhere in my body. And apparently it's kind of typical with liver stuff and infection. It was kind of a reaction of the body to get rid of the infection. I guess the body tries to get rid of the fluids from the infection, or like something along those lines. Like, I guess that extra fluid or matter that the body tries to evacuate, and that's not visible to the naked eye, but it kind of pours out of the pores of your skin. And so I got very itchy everywhere. I was scratching like hell everywhere to blood. I was scratching like my legs, my feet, my arms, my face. It was so itchy. So that was just like not pain, but like a really hard thing to have to deal with on top of everything. So anyway, I had done like all the tests they've prescribed, couldn't find anything. I still had 5 doctors coming every morning, prescribing more tests, asking me more questions, and nothing would be conclusive. But weirdly, so for the first 10 days, all the liver indicators and blood tests would just keep going up and up and up and up and up, saying that the infection was spreading and getting stronger. So they were scared that I would go into like septicemia, like full body infection shock. So they were watching me very closely. But after 10 days, those numbers, and I mean, I was like, let's say a normal liver level is like, let's say 0. Mine were like 200. It was incredibly high. It was way, 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 way high on the scale. So, but then after 10 days, it started to first stay still. Like those numbers would stay still. I would stay at 200 times the normal. And then like little by little, it would slowly every day go down just a little bit. Like instead of 200 times, it was 190 times normal level and 170. So like after a little while, it didn't subside, but it kind of diminished. And it was right before Christmas, and so I had hopes to be back home for Christmas. And they said that, yeah, I could probably go out if the numbers continued in that direction, like continue going down, as long as I would be very careful and do not eat anything or drink anything that could hurt the liver. So like, no champagne, no chocolate, like nothing of that. And I would have to be followed by like a specialist at yet another hospital every few weeks to keep running tests and make sure that I was okay. But yeah, 2 days before Christmas, I think I was cleared out with still very high levels of infection, but it was going into the right direction. And they gave me like strong painkillers to take with me. So yeah, I just went home and, numbers kept going down. And after a few weeks, it kind of just subsided and went back to normal. And like I did do some non-really Western medicine stuff that really helped a lot in bringing those numbers down very quickly, and all that type of like, Eastern medicine stuff I've done, like non-traditional medicine, kind of indicated that all that episode with my liver was very likely all linked to emotions. But, I won't go into that level of detail today because it's a whole other story. So yeah, I went back to my normal life without any liver problems anymore. But that's when things got worse. Not at the physical level so much, although I developed some weird chronic pains since then in different parts of my body, which I'm still seeing specialists for today. Things that are really handicapping me in my everyday life. But, no one finds what's wrong. But again, like I don't have time for this today. It's a whole other story again. But yeah, so what started to go really wrong was mentally, and something that I had previously mentioned all the GPs that I saw before that liver episode, and which I also had mentioned to the hospital staff and doctors. But again, no one really listened. They were just focused on the liver. They didn't care about all those other stuff I was telling them. They just cared about the liver and physical stuff. They don't care about like mental and emotionally weird stuff that I was experiencing. To them, it was like separate. Anyway, so yeah, and that thing was that I don't feel like I'm here. That was still there. I can't feel myself. I poke my body, I can't feel my body. I feel like I cannot quantify time. Like, I wake up, I don't feel like it's the morning. It could be night, we could be in 2012 or in 2050. Like, I lost the conception of time and space itself. Like, it just didn't make sense to me, time and space. And so I didn't really know how to express that feeling to people, except from saying that I feel like I'm not here, I'm not present. Yeah, like I know what time it is, but I don't feel like it's that time. I know it's morning, but I don't feel like it's morning. I know it's time to go to bed, and I should be tired, and I can like feel the tiredness in my body, but I don't feel tired. So I like couldn't sleep. It's just impossible to explain. And so, despite all my attempts to explain that feeling of being outside of my body, outside of myself, was impossible to both like people around me and medical like professionals. And like most people wouldn't even believe me because I was able to function completely normally. Like I would wake up, I would go to work, I would perform really well at work, got like a lot of promotions in a very short amount of time. I would be in social situations with my friends, like I would do all of my everyday tasks. I just wasn't there to do them. I don't feel like I did all those things every day. And so I remember at the time I said to my GP, I was moving house with my best friend to a new place. And so as I mentioned, my best friend was in the US for 2 years before that. She had just come back, so we decided to move in together after 2 years apart, and we found that great place that we both loved. And I remember being like neutral about moving with her, when I knew that I should be my normal me, would be so excited to move with her in that place that we chose together, and it would have been like such a high intensity moment. And I acted like it was, like I acted like I was all those things, that I was excited, that I was happy, just because on paper I knew that I was supposed to feel that way, but I didn't feel anything inside. I was neutral. I was nothing. It was just I was numb of any feelings. So just kept sharing that with my GP, and again he didn't really react or think anything of it. And like it's a trauma in itself to share something and feel like you're crazy and not getting any response in front of you other than it's nothing, like not being understood. And it's consistently feeling like no one gets what's going wrong, like you go crazy. It's just very traumatic. So after a while I just gave up of sharing anything and of what I was living, and I just continued feeling that way and continued life. But that sensation, like it's not a feeling, it's a sensation. It's just a knowing that you're here, just because one part of your brain knows that you're here in the physical world. The brain knows that you're in that place at that time doing that thing, but there's no living it. There's no experience it. I just don't know how to describe it, but I was in that state of not being myself and feeling myself, and all the time, constantly, and it continues until today. So it's been 9 years, and that condition got worse and worse. But you get used to it. It just becomes your new normal, and you get used to being out of yourself and just act normal. So you just act normal based on your previous experience of life, based on your brain's memory of who you were, how you acted, and how you were in certain situations, and how you reacted to those situations, or certain emotions which you do not feel anymore, but from memory how it felt like. So I work in tech, so I work in PR, but mostly for tech companies, and a lot of the conversations in the tech industry at the moment revolves around AI, artificial intelligence. And well, I feel like I'm an AI. I feel like there's an AI running my life that knows exactly how to behave in certain circumstances, depending on whom I'm surrounded with. It knows exactly what to say, what to do, how to act, just to give the appearance that it's me and that I'm there present, but I'm not. And I know that I'm conscious of that. And that's the worst part, because I know that it's happening. I'm conscious of that happening. I'm conscious of me being there, but not there. It's like I have different levels of consciousness in my brain, but like not the right kind of consciousness that you want to have. So, one part of me is like a robot just functioning. It's like there's a robot with a script. There's a script written. Tomorrow you're going to wake up, we're going to be that day. So it's going to be like, I don't know, the 15th of March. That's how you will feel when you will wake up, and when it's morning, that's how you should feel. And if this happens during your day at work, probably the normal you would react that way. So there's a script for that. If that happens at work, this is how your normal self would react. So here's a script for that too. If anything happens, we know exactly how to react. So yeah. So, like what I do, or like what that AI robot does, is basically to react like I would have reacted 10 years ago before I had that, that condition. So it fools everyone because it looks exactly like it's me, but I'm not the one reacting. It's that other part of me, it's that fake robot part, like it's that autopilot reacting to the situation following that script, but it's not me. And so I can manufacture emotions, yeah, easy. Like I just manufacture all my emotions. I manufacture what should happen in like that specific situation based on all the knowledge of my previous self in life. That's how I know that's how I should feel in that certain situation. So that's how I should show that emotion, even though I'm not feeling it. 10 years ago, when I used to feel that way or that way, that's how I behaved. That's how my body felt. That's how my eyes moved. That's how my heart rate raised or lowered. That's how my face changed. That's how other people would know that I felt that way. Like, so that AI in my brain just kind of reproduces exactly that. So every time there is a situation where I should on paper feel happy or sad or annoyed or whatever it is, I can manufacture exactly that. It's as if like it was me, but it's not me. It's very disturbing. And it's really hard to explain to people and to therapists. It's like impossible. And that's why I haven't found like any help in all the therapies I have done so far. Because that depersonalization, derealisation syndrome wasn't identified. It's not visible, and it's so hard for people to express and explain. Like just to make sense of it for yourself is hard. So then expressing it to people in a way that they can understand, like it's so difficult. And again, you just run into people who don't understand consistently. So you just like, you know what, it's too painful to go through that again and again. So I'd rather not share anything and just, live into my horrible experience and not say anything to people and just pretend like it's me and pretend like, like I'm normal. So usually my therapist would just focus on my depression and anxiety, which I have a lot too. And I'm still constantly anxious and my body is in constant fight or flight response. But I think because my mind and body are still completely traumatized and never recovered from that like episode 9 years ago, those 2 years of consistent and constant stress and abuse in my relationship, and like all the stress also at work, like all at the same time, but too much. And the worst thing is that, I'm speaking from a place where I'm aware of all of that. I know all of that. And that's the worst thing because I'm conscious and I can't do anything about it. I cannot do anything about it. That depersonalization, derealisation just makes me numb to everything. And that script, that AI is just running my life and living my life instead of me. And I watch it do it without having any control of what it's doing. I'm like in the back seat, tied to my seat with a belt, and I can't move. And that whole situation just makes me even more anxious and depressed. But I keep hiding those other symptoms because that robot is running my life, and that robot doesn't want me to connect to any of that depression, anxiety, showing my emotions, my true self to people, because it's that robot's job to keep me going and appear as normal as possible on the outside to protect, whatever it's trying to protect that got really hurt 2 years ago, 9 years ago. So yeah, like that's kind of a summary of what I've been living for years now. And that's really tough. But now that this depersonalization, derealisation condition has been kind of identified, I think I'm finally going to be able to do some like appropriate work and get better. So yeah, like I just thought I would share this in case anyone is going through this thing and thinks that they're crazy and going mad. You're not. So I just hope that, it'll be a little bit helpful for anyone going through this, or just for anyone going through a tough time, really. And like there are many other things that I would like to talk about. Some of them I've mentioned earlier in that video, some others I haven't mentioned at all, but that kind of help people a little bit. I also want to share about, how yoga has been my lifeline since I started doing it a few years ago. But, again, that will be for another day, because that's another whole story. But, hopefully it will be soon, because there's just so much that I want to share now that I have started to open up a little bit. So I kind of get the feeling that it needs now to pour out of me. So yeah, I just hope that this is helpful, or just resonates in any way, no matter what you're going through. And yeah, just trauma doesn't look like what you might think, and depression might not look what you might think on the exterior. You can never know what people experience inside. That's just a good lesson to take on every day and when you're around people. So yeah, and like if you want to have a chat about all of that, I would be very happy to. So I guess that's just it for now. And hopefully I'll talk to you soon.